Hey everyone, a nerd named Mark here, and I'm doing a new video. I tweeted, I'm doing new content. I'm still gonna be doing my old content. You're gonna get your Toku reviews. I'm actually editing some Kamen Rider videos and some Ultraman stuff right now. Um, but I'm expanding. Like I said, with more time than that, there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about. Today, I am talking about something that honestly I've been hearing it for months now. I just there are content creators that I'm actually a fan of that a lot of people aren't. I'm gonna get into that because it does bring up my opinion and from my standpoint of a comic book collector. I'm turning 36 next month. I have been collecting comics since I was 6. When I was 6, I bought my first comic book. It was a Spectacular Spider-Man, and I that was the floodgates. I've even talked about a podcast. My mom was a big comic book fan, big nerd of Star Wars, Star Trek, Buffy, um, comics, Archie, stuff like that. So, I've been doing it. I've been collecting and reading for a very long time. And there are times where I fell out with comics because of writing and just life. But for the last couple months, there's been a term that's been thrown around quite a bit called the MCU. And now the new one that just started trending over the last couple of days is the DCU. I'm not going to be talking about the DC side of things until things are confirmed, until we get the actual like press releases, trailers, this and that to kind of prove any sort of thing. And also, by the way, I'm not an MCU shill. I'm not a Okay, it doesn't help that I'm drinking from a Disney coffee mug. This is my lady's. I got it for it's one of those heat color change ones. Like I'm a Disney. We enjoy Disney from the standpoint of what Disney used to be, what they used to put out. Um, I will say 75% of what Disney does now, I don't really care for. Mainly because I don't like that kind of art style. I like the old school like drawn style when they were doing cells to make the animations. I am a traditionalist with my artwork. That's besides the point. I just want to, not come off as a hypocrite. I had to explain the Disney mug because I'm not a shill. I'm not like, and honestly, I'm not defending Marvel or Disney in this video, but I'm also not going to shit on them. Um, so this whole MCU thing, like, I don't want to say it's stupid because everyone's entitled to their opinion. There are ways you can interpret things. So they make valid points. A lot of content creators, a lot of people tweeting, they're making points to why I could see and understand why they would think that. For me as a comic book reader and collector, kind of like curator, so to speak, of things of comic books, like when it comes to Japanese stuff, which I have 2 Ultraman videos coming up, which are going to be really good. I consider myself like a curator, historian of like Super Ryan, Ultraman, Kamen Rider, stuff like that. And at the same time, I know my comics. And there's some content creators, people like Eric July with the like he's one of the few content creators where I think from an intelligence standpoint, so smart. He can explain things where you're just like, even if you don't agree or you think it's like, oh, he's just being angry. No, like go watch or listen for canon's sake his podcast. Like he is very intelligent with the way he says things. I agree with like 90, maybe 80% of what he says, especially with tokenization, gender swapping, race swapping, bait and switch for stuff, and especially from the standpoint of the comic book industry with the writers. Um, Now I'm open minded with comics. Like I have my go to comic book writers that I'll pull no matter what they write, but if it's bad, I'll stop. There are a lot of changes that have been done with like origins being changed, like the whole Static Shock origin that's going to be changed. That bothered me because Static Shock was so good. And I guess I should start this. This is something that annoys me a lot because I get this a lot in DMs, comments, and I delete them because I don't give a shit. But it's something I'm going to address in this video so everyone can leave me alone. I addressed it in a Kamen Rider video, but I know because it's Kamen Rider, a lot of people from the West probably don't care to watch it. I get asked a lot, what are you? And this pisses me off because I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, well, your race, your heritage, and I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm just gonna get this out of the way right now. I am mixed race. I am half Italian. Actually, it's only like more like half Italian. Like the half of the Italian, half of that is Italian, the other half is Sicilian. So it's like 25 Italian, 25 Sicilian. It's Italy. even though it's Sicily. It's a thing. Italian. Other half, I am native and African. The melanin of my skin does not convey that. Actually, because ever since I moved to San Diego, I'm actually a more tan than I normally am. I get pretty white, okay? And that's just the melanin of my skin. I have cousins who are the exact same mix as me, and they are a lot darker. It's just how the dice were rolled, okay? So right off the bat, let's debunk this whole any phobics or isms you want to label me. Not happening, okay? I am just going to explain the MCU the best I can from what I'm understanding. So, this is something that's been going on for a while. Uh, I think it mainly revolved around once Phase 4 was starting. Let's face it, with the MCU, once Endgame came out, I mean, 22 films over a decade, I was burnt out. For me, the MCU, that chapter was closed. I was like, okay, I got this 22 film arc, even though like Spider-Man or Iron Man 1 was kind of its own thing. Thor was kind of too. They had a little, but like it wasn't really until like Iron Man 2 and this and that. Like Incredible Hulk was on its own, even though that wasn't technically Marvel, but it tied in. They had, stuff with like Nick Fury and everything else, and Thunderbolt Ross. So that's a continuation of it. But I was done. I was like, you know what? I just dedicated, a decade of film, 22 films in theaters, some multiple viewings, Blu-rays. I was like, I was satisfied. I was done. And then they're like, well, we have Phase 4 now. And I'm like, oh, great. And then, they got the Fox properties back. And I'm like, no, like, and mind you, between all the MCU stuff, I was still going to watch, all the X-Men films, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, even the reboot of Fantastic Four is probably like one of the few times I've seen a movie in theaters where I wanted to walk out. The only other time was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre reboot, which I thought was trash, and a lot of people like it. I didn't. I just didn't care for it. I was, 17 when that came out, and I was such a horror film buff even back then that I was like, this is garbage. Like the original's so good. So, needless to say, the MCU, it's the Phase 4, and Black Widow, Eternals, Shang Chi, and then so far as what's come out, and then we had the Disney Plus shows like Loki, WandaVision, Falcon Winter Soldier, Hawkeye, What If. I think that's it for shows. I don't know. I was burnt out honestly, so I watched WandaVision when it was airing, and I watched Falcon and Winter Soldier, and then that was it. Everything else I actually just now recently finished because I didn't want to. I was burnt out. I was not hyped for anything comic book related. The Snyder Cut I enjoy, but that I'm strictly talking about Marvel right now. The DC I will do a video on because the DCU is a mess, and that's has nothing to do with the whole DCU that they're saying. Like no. Um. So you know, with I saw No Way Home. We saw No Way Home the day it came out, and I loved it. And that kind of actually got me my juices going for comic book movies again. I was like, I haven't been that genuinely happy coming out of a movie in a very long time. Like, you gotta figure out at 35, like, Spider Man, being my favorite comic book. Like, we're approaching 30 years since I bought my first Spider Man comic book, which was a big deal for me. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's just a comic book. No, like, comic books were my escapism. Comic books are what, I loved when I was stressed. Working two jobs, trying to go to college, trying to save money, and then being broke. Like, I would find a way to get my comic books. And just those few moments every Wednesday, just getting to sit down and read a comic book, like, I lived for those moments. There were times where, like, that's the only thing I was looking forward to. So, seeing Spider-Man, like, especially after being a fan of the Raimi trilogy, even though the third film I had my issues with, I even enjoyed Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2. I think bad writing for 2 is what, but, like, 1 still I hold in high regards. If you follow me on Letterbox, I actually ranked all my Spider-Man films, even the Toei one, because it counts. If you've seen the podcast with Chris, where we spoiled No Way Home, I went on a tangent where Toei Spider-Man counts towards the overall Spider-Man, like, properties. So, the MCU. Um, Black Widow. I'm gonna just go by the so one of the main things was like, oh, well, Black Widow film. female driven. This is then phase 4, phase bore, which I was like, okay. I got a little bit of a like pun chuckle out of it because I love a good pun. Um, the problem with that is I get they're saying, oh, well, phase 4, so female story driven and this and that. It's like, well, for starters, we just had 22 films, and we can't have another Iron Man. We can't have another Steve Rogers Captain America. Thor, I'm gonna get into down the in later on the video, and we can't really, like we already had. I don't think we're ever gonna get a solo Hulk film, and them saying, well, Bruce Banner's gonna be in She-Hulk. He's gonna play second fiddle. It's like, no, this is a loophole. Okay, they can't do Marvel and Disney can't do a straight up solo Hulk. He can be used in other titles. So it makes sense, especially from the story of She-Hulk. I think She-Hulk, out of all the Disney Plus shows, is going to be the best, so to speak. I didn't mind Falcon and Winter Soldier. I think it needed a few more episodes and not to have things like Flag Smashers that like stretched out so much, like or so like just rushed and muddled and changed so much, which I could see. Flag Smasher and them, they made a female. A lot of people weren't happy. But with Black Widow, the main thing was Taskmaster. Everyone was like, oh, well, Taskmaster being a female. Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Taskmaster is a female. And a lot of people are like, oh, no one cared about who Taskmaster until, they realized they're a female. No, Taskmaster is, I think, very underrated villain, okay? The fact that Taskmaster can learn your fighting style on the fly, and basically the more moves you do, they've already basically memorized them, learned them, they can counter you. And there were some great fights in the comics. I mean, Taskmaster, literally pun intended, was putting everyone to task, okay? And there are very few villains that I'm a fan of that haven't been brought to movies or television. Taskmaster was one of them. I always wanted Taskmaster. Morbius, Kraven the Hunter. I always wanted, and I feel like they've ruined it because they never mentioned it. I always wanted Nick Fury's brother, I always forget his first name, to be in the MCU at some point. I think the Hydra stuff was kind of outside of like Winter Soldier was in the first Captain America. Like it could have been better. They could have done more with Hydra. And so Taskmaster being female, that's what kind of started it. Everyone's like, oh, they made her female, this and that. And there was a bait and switch because we saw the suit actor as a dude and this and that. So I get that. I didn't hate Black Widow. It was an all right movie. I think it was just 5 or 6 years too late. The Black Widow, and I've said this on my podcast before, Black Widow should have been the film that came out in the time slot of Captain Marvel. But they should have left out the stuff of Natasha being dead. I think instead of Captain Marvel being in that slot, that they should have had Black Widow's film there. Captain Marvel should have been either a lot sooner or post Infinity War, post Endgame. So that way there, it's like when she showed up in Endgame, you'd be like, who the hell is that? Well, I mean, obviously comic people will be like, oh, it's Captain Marvel, but like, you'd be like, who is that? And then we get Captain Marvel. Or like a lot of things can be changed. But I don't want to talk about Captain Marvel. I didn't hate that movie. I just didn't like it. I think from a retcon standpoint and the time frame of its release and this and that and how it was marketed really kind of left me a bit gutted because it was not needed to see before Avengers, and they made it marketed like you have to see this before you see Avengers or it's going to make sense. It ties everything together, and it didn't. It just didn't. So the fact that we got Black Widow, and it's like that's really the MCU, one of the MCU arguments. It's like Black Widow's been in the MCU since Iron Man 2. Okay, and Scarlett Johansson deserved a movie a lot sooner. 100%. And I know they did the passing guard. There's a new Black Widow, and I'm okay with that. Like, these actors can't do these roles forever, And then we had Shang Chi. Now, I have a whole nother video I'm going to be going over because a lot of people bring up the argument of how Spider-Man is destroying the MCU and sales and this and that. But at the same time, outside of Black Widow, Eternals and Shang-Chi are two new IPs that new for the film-wise that Marvel's done. They've obviously been around in the comics for quite some time, but they aren't household names. And I compare it to when Ant-Man or Guardians of the Galaxy was originally released. Those were risks and gambles that Marvel made, and they paid off. And they thought that would happen again. So I have a whole nother video I've actually already recorded. So I got to edit that. That's going to be going live at some point where I'm going to basically be comparing that whole situation. So Shang Chi, like, no, I don't think that fits the MCU argument. I can see where they're gonna where a lot of people made valid points of it being in the phase bore because it wasn't for a lot of people an exciting movie. Me personally, I'm a fan of Shang Chi. I have some of the old comics. If you've read the old comics, and people are like, oh, it could have been like the comics. No. Okay, we know why the Shang-Chi comics were started. And if you read those comics, you know exactly why those comics were started because they were trying to hit a demographic and they did it completely wrong and it did not. Like, oh, they are not that good. It's kind of like old Iron Fist. Everyone's like, oh, Iron Fist and the Defenders and that. It's like, go read those old comics and tell me they're great. Like, they might be great for you, but like, or you might enjoy them, but they're not on the level of like a House of M or Civil War or the old school Infinity Quest and stuff like. They're not on that level at all. So then we have Eternals, and I get it. Everyone's like, "Oh, well, it's an ensemble cast. There's men and women." No, if you watch Eternals, obviously we know, like, it's female led from a leader of the group and this and that. I think from that it just suffered from bad writing, bad editing, bad CG, and I don't even consider that MCU. Like, it's just a flop. They tried something new, it didn't work, and you have to try something new after over a decade of films. So I give them credit for trying something new, but at the same time, you have a formula that worked. Why are we stopping that formula? And then, like, the main thing also is Hawkeye. People and Loki, even when they brought up female Loki, and I was like, I just finished Loki. Loki from start to finish was really just trying to explain timelines. If anything, it was just building up for so you're not confused when they start bringing in multiverse stuff, which is lazy. I always think multiverse and time travel is lazy. Yes, it worked in Spider-Man No Way Home. The fan service, everything else was great, and it made sense in the story standpoint. But I've always found time travel and multiverses the laziest trope in comics, sci-fi, horror, anything that, like, it's just lazy because, oh, how are we going to explain this? Multiverse. Good idea. How are we going to explain this? Time travel. The only time I enjoyed stuff like that in the comics really was Days of Future Past from X-Men. And some Spider-Verse stuff, and when we got into like Ben Riley, Clone Saga, stuff like that, I'm okay with that. But a majority of the time, it's very lazy, and you can kind of realistically blame Star Trek. I'm just gonna say it. As a Star Trek fan, I'm gonna say we can blame Star Trek for multiverse time travel. Like, we can blame all that shit on Star Trek, even though that's not really a valid argument. I'm just gonna say it. Okay. So that's all Loki was for. So Loki it wasn't even that great of a show. And then Hawkeye. I'm a huge Hawkeye fan. Okay. I know a lot of people probably won't admit that they're a Hawkeye fan publicly. I will publicly go out and say I'm a Hawkeye fan. I really enjoyed, from a more recent standpoint, Old Man Hawkeye. I did enjoy Hawkeye versus Deadpool. Like, Hawkeye's been kind of one of those like I liked Green Arrow too. I did archery growing up. Grew up on a farm. I did archery. I like enjoy it. So like I kind of like those characters. I'm also a Green Lantern fan. But the DC stuff, definitely another video because my issues with DC are probably worse than what's going on with Marvel, especially from a comic standpoint. But so with Hawkeye, the main argument for the DC MCU is Kate Bishop. Portrayed as overly strong already, no training. She's taking care of herself, and Hawkeye is playing second fiddle. We have to make women super strong, men bad. And this is not a slight because some of those are like misquoted interpretations of, Nerdrotic, which I'm a fan of. I'm just going to say this right now. I'm a fan of Nerdrotic. I like the Friday Night Tights. I watch it every week when it's live. If I miss some of it, I listen to it on Apple Podcasts. Like I said, there's a lot of content creators I actually enjoy, and you can enjoy content creators and not agree 100% with what they say. I think when I break down like Eric July, when it comes to comic book knowledge, lore, history, easily one of the top people I will watch a video on. He knows his shit. And I may not agree with how he presents it, but it doesn't, like, the words and the facts are still true. Nerdrotic, when they talk about Star Wars stuff and some comic book things, I agree with maybe like 75% what they say. A lot of stuff, when they talk about like non-comics, non-nerdy things, I'm just like, I don't follow any of that stuff, so I'm just like, okay, I'll listen. But I didn't see. I understand how they interpreted how the Kate Bishop Hawkeye relationship, especially in the show, with how it ended and everything else. I'm not going to spoil the exact ending of Hawkeye because I have a lot of friends who watch my stuff and they haven't watched it yet. They're waiting. So I get how they would interpret that. I saw it as, well, we saw training in a montage, and she was helpless in the beginning. He was kind of more like the mentor figure, but not always saving her. It's kind of like a trial by fire type of situation. But the thing that suffers from these Marvel Disney Plus shows are they're like 6, maybe 8 episodes most. That's what's hurting it. They are cutting out so much stuff, so they're just worried about point A, point B, and then it's just like, well, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. It's like, or you could make the points further so we have more content on that line. And I think that's what really is able to be argument about this. Now, the main thing, okay, so Captain Marvel, the Marvels, anyways, with like Miss Marvel and Captain Marvel being female led, it's like, well, that's what Captain Marvel was. I sure, but the MCU, I don't know if it's. I think it's less of actual females being like in the forefront as the strongest, and more along the lines of the back end side of things. You know, the directors, the writers, the you know the ideals. I can see the argument. I don't agree with it, but I see where they're coming from. And a lot of people are like, oh, like I've had conversations in private with friends, like, well, you're playing both sides. I'm like, what sides? They're like, oh, the right and the left. I'm like, what are you fucking talking about? Like, I don't care. This has nothing about, to me personally, this my opinion, everything has nothing to do with political values, what right or left or anything like that. I'm literally just someone who likes comic books, wants to talk about comic books, wants to see movies and see this. Like, once comic books became pop culture, they no longer were. I'm not the demographic anymore. I'm 100% like, I get it. I'm not the demographic. And people like my lady are the demographic. Or my friends who don't read comics, they're the demographic. Casual, let's go see a movie, popcorn flick. Those of us who have over 5,000-6,000 comics in their collection, have read every single one of them, this and that, we are not the demographic. They are not making this for us. And I accept that. I have accepted that. It took a while, honestly, for me to accept that. I'm very sinusy. Um, that this is not for me. I'm not who they want to make these movies for. And it's one of those things, do I take that to heart? Do I take that personally? No. Okay? It's a comic book movie. It's supposed to be fun. What's it called? It's supposed to be fun. Just like, shut off your brain. Just go enjoy a movie. You know, I'm not going to see a period piece or like this over drama. I wanted to see some comic book shit. And so the main thing in this is actually the one that I don't take personally, so to speak, but I as someone who's this is one of my favorite runs of a comic, and I'm hoping it even hints at like 30% of the story arc, is Thor Love and Thunder. Okay? A lot of people are mad because Jane Foster's become Thor. Guess what? She becomes Thor right after in Original Sin, which was not a bad comic run. On hindsight, seeing everything we got like up until now, Original Sin really laid a lot of groundwork from a Thor standpoint, because it led into War of the Realms, which then led into Thor now, where he's now All Father of Asgard. And so we'll just go back. We'll go back to Original Sin. Thor became unworthy for Mjolnir, and he left it on the moon because he couldn't lift it anymore. Jane Foster has cancer. She's dying. Becomes Thor. For a while there, you don't know who Thor is. You just know it's a female. They did a lot of like third person shoulder shots. You never got to, tell, especially with the way the helmet was and everything else. You didn't get to see who Thor was. This whole time though, Thor's having like an identity crisis. Who is he? Why is he not worthy? But he still had some powers. He was still super strong and everything else. He was, using his axe. And then it was Jane Foster was revealed as Thor, and Thor had no problem. He's like, it's fine, I'm not worthy. Then we got into War of the Realms, which was such like very rarely do we get a good Thor event. This was a good Thor event, let me tell you. And it led to ultimately Thor getting Mjolnir back, becoming, then because the whole entire time he stopped calling himself Thor, God of Thunder, this night he was just Odin's son. Then he became Thor again, and Odin made him the Allfather of Asgard, and that's what led into Donny Cates' Thor, which was a really good run. I'm where he became a Herald of Galactus, but in that time frame after him becoming Thor again, Jane Foster became Valkyrie. So I'm like, okay, and I see now that we're getting Jane Foster as Thor. That was actually a decent Thor run. Like she wasn't just a cookie cutter. Here's Thor's powers. Here you go. Like she actually had weird manipulation control over Mjolnir, not just throwing it and it coming back. She could throw it, control it, arc it, make it spin around enemies like a tornado. Like she had more, like she still had the strength, the speed, flying, stuff like that. But she just had. It was a new, unique way to see someone handle Mjolnir and actually have become Thor. I thought it was really cool. So from an MCU standpoint, and this is why I'm not gonna say Thor: Love and Thunder is like, oh, the MCU and this and that, because like this has potential for us to like, okay, give Chris Hemsworth a break, have Jane Foster as Thor, but at the same time still have some stingers, some hinting, maybe a couple scenes here and there of Thor on his journey, not being Thor, just being Odin's son, because we already got the hint now that he's not, leading Asgard. We have Valkyrie doing that, so it's like I get, like I said, I understand why people are just like, oh yeah, but it's like it's not the MCU, but it's not. Be, I think it's more than just the females lead characters and being interjected, there because realistically, outside of Eternals, which did do some race and gender swapping, everything that's going forward is still to an extent, not a story standpoint, but a characters and what they're doing are comic accurate. It's just whether or not those are the comics you read. Comics have been around for so long that they could pick and choose where they want to take an arc and, kind of do their own spin of it. Like Civil War, let's face it, Civil War is one movie. That was really one movie. And even looking back, Civil War, a lot of fan service because it was kind of Avengers, everyone facing each other. But when you look at, I mean, yeah, Black Panther was in it, and we had Spider-Man, everybody else. But it was like, from the standpoint of the comic, like the comic was a lot better. Not Civil War 2, though. We don't talk about that. But yeah, I don't think this MCU thing is real. I think it's just a label because you can't really put a label on, what your opinion is of this phase 4 right now. Like, we had, so many movies, and it's just like, okay, we can't, a lot of the previous heroes we can't use. Like, we're getting Ant-Man and the Wasp, we're getting another Guardians. So I was just like, this 2020 wasn't really the best year for MCU related stuff outside of Spider-Man, even though that was Sony, but in conjunction with Marvel, because Marvel got what, like 25% cut, so technically it counts. But it's just one of those things where it's like, I've been hearing it for so long, and it wasn't until my friends started like talking and saying MCU that I was like, okay, guys, let's have a talk. Why do you think this is a terminology for this? Why is this a big deal for you? Because honestly, the last 2 years, from movie standpoint and comics and this and that, like I've been kind of falling out with Marvel and DC. I haven't been pulling as many, and I've been getting into other things that make me happy. That I'm not gonna say will disappoint me, but I think is time better spent, like my podcast, working, um, you know, relaxing, playing video games, just enjoying life instead of being so bottled up and so concerned about the MCU and comic books. I mean, even building Gundam model kits, that's Gunpla and Minipla and Sotos and Udos, that's like what my focus is now. I'm still pulling the comics, mainly indies, which I said I'm having a couple more videos going over that stuff. But the MCU is just a buzz terminology. Like, I can see the point where it's getting certain comic book fans and traditionalists riled up, and it's just, I don't want to say it's stupid, because that would be saying everyone's opinion and everyone who is talking about it is stupid, and that's not the point. That's not the case at all. I think everyone's entitled to their opinion. And this isn't me playing it safe or playing both sides. Like, I hate that terminology. This is me just flat out saying, hey, I get where everyone's coming from. I agree with some of the stuff they're saying. I don't agree with a lot of their stuff. Like, but most of the stuff I agree with what they're saying could have been easily fixed. And I don't think Disney, Marvel, anything that they want to fix it because they're still making their money. Yeah, they lost money with Eternals, Black Widow, and Shang Chi. They lost money. They can blame the pandemic all they want. I will say, to an extent, it is valid because at the time, a lot of theaters weren't open. I have friends back home where stuff is still closed down and this and that, and they don't even want to go to the movies, but they really want to, and they couldn't even go see Spider Man. So I get that the pandemic can be blamed to a certain extent, but at the same time, you have to also look at your own quality of product you're putting out and kind of see, hey, maybe you're doing something wrong. Look at all these other films that were making money, and now our films aren't. Like Shang-Chi, I can't wait to talk. I can't wait till the other video because like I broke down exactly why these films didn't make the money they did and how it's unfair to compare it to No Way Home. But from an MCU standpoint, this is the only time I'm going to be saying MCU except for the DCU video I'm doing. Other than that, I'm not using that terminology. I don't think it's productive, honestly. I don't I like I said, I understand the points. There are some valid criticisms, but at the same time there's some stuff that's being blown way out of proportion. And there comes a time where we have to stop comparing everything to The Last Jedi. Yes, The Last Jedi was not good. But when I see things in articles being written and it's like this and this is, like the Matrix Resurrection. I did not like that movie at all. I'm a huge fan of the first Matrix. I watched all three beforehand and I realized the second one, besides the highway scene, was good. Third one was not good at all. First one was really good, and then I watched. I'm like, we can't keep comparing everything to Last Jedi. Like it's just it happened. I didn't like it. I moved on from it. Like I'm not dwelling on anything, especially a movie. Like I'm a huge Star Wars fan too. Like I haven't. Star Wars is just I don't want to say dead to me. I just don't care anymore. Like I realized if you're in a fandom and you've been a fan for something for more than 20 years, it's not gonna be this. It's not gonna hit the same, you know. But that's it for the MCU talk. Like I said, I I could see the valid points of it. I personally just don't. I don't. I don't see it. I personally don't see it. I can see valid reasoning, but from a breakdown and looking at the movies, looking at everything coming out, I just personally don't. I don't agree with it. But that's not to say that just because I don't agree with it, it's wrong. Just that's my opinion. And yeah, so I thank you guys for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this MCU situation because it's been going on. Like I've seen it. I did like moderate, minor research just to see around the time frame it started. It was like 8 to 10 months ago. It started being used as a terminology. Like I said, I've watched content creators and I'm a fan of these content creators. So don't get me wrong. I'm not throwing hate at anyone. You can be a fan of a content creator and not agree with everything they say, you know? But let me know in the comments below what you think about the MCU stuff. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel. Like I said, I'm still doing my Toku stuff. I got to edit a lot of videos. I'm back at work. I had my little holiday, couple days off to enjoy the things. But yeah, I thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys in the next video.